For 2 years, my father's number sat in my phone like a scar I couldn't bring myself to delete. I didn't call it. He didn't call me. That was the agreement we never actually made out loud, but somehow both understood the morning I packed my car and drove away from our house in Harrisburg without looking back. I was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Columbus when the text came through. It was a Tuesday in October. The kind of cold, gray morning where the sky looks like it's been wrung out and left to dry. I was making coffee, still in my pajamas, my hair pulled up in a knot, and my phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. I almost didn't open it. But something made me stop, something in my chest that I'd spent 2 years trying to quiet. Lily, it's Dad. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I wouldn't blame you if you delete this, but I need help. I don't know who else to call. I read it 3 times. My coffee went cold. My first instinct was to cry. My second was to call my older brother Marcus, who had been the one constant through all of it, the one who drove 4 hours to help me move, the one who sat with me on my apartment floor eating cold pizza the night everything fell apart. Marcus, who knew our father better than anyone and who had warned me, gently but clearly, that healing would take longer than either of us wanted it to. I called him before I even finished reading the text again. He reached out, I said when he picked up. No greeting. No preamble. He'd know what I meant. There was a long pause. What did he say? I read him the message word for word. When I finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment in the way he gets when he's thinking hard, not hesitating. Thinking. What number is that? He asked. Unknown. No area code I recognize. Send it to me. I heard him typing something in the background. Marcus works in IT security, has for the past 8 years, and his brain works in a way mine doesn't. Always looking for the seam in the story, the place where the logic bends wrong. Don't respond yet, he said. Why? Just wait. Give me 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes were some of the longest of my life. I sat on my kitchen counter with my cold coffee and stared at the message on my phone. I read it again. I tried to hear my father's voice in it. My father, who grew up in a small house outside of Mechanicsburg, who coached my youth soccer team every Saturday for 6 years, who used to leave little notes in my school lunch, "Have a great day, kiddo. Love, Dad," in his cramped left-handed print that always slanted down toward the right corner of the page like the words were trying to escape. The text on my screen had no slant. It had no voice. It was flat in the way that only typed words can be flat, devoid of the specific texture of a person. But I wanted it to be him so badly that I was already bargaining with myself. Marcus called back in 9 minutes. That number is registered to a prepaid SIM, he said. Bought at a Walmart in Allentown 6 weeks ago. Cash purchase. No name attached. The floor seemed to tilt slightly under my feet. Dad lives in Lancaster, I said, more to myself than to Marcus. I know where he lives. That's not close to Allentown. Know where he lives? That's not close to Allentown. No, Marcus said carefully. It's not. I set the phone down on the counter and stared at the ceiling. My apartment was quiet in that specific way that feels loud. The refrigerator humming. The distant sound of someone's TV through the wall. I thought about the 2 years. The silence that had started the day I told my father that I was leaving the family business, that I was done pretending to want a life I didn't want, that his expectations were not my obligations. I thought about the way his face went still when I said it. Not angry, exactly. Something worse. Shut down. We hadn't spoken since. Now someone was using his name to get to me, and they'd chosen a Tuesday morning in October because they knew, somehow they knew, that I would be alone. That I would be vulnerable, that 2 years of silence had left a wound in me big enough to reach into. I picked the phone back up. What do we do? I asked Marcus. We find out what they actually want, he said. Text back. Keep it vague. Don't offer anything. Just ask what kind of help he needs. I typed slowly, careful with every word. Dad, I got your message. What's going on? What kind of help do you need? The response came back in under 3 minutes. That was the first sign that whoever was on the other end was waiting. I'm in serious trouble, Lily. I owe money I can't pay back. Medical bills from last spring, I didn't want to worry you. If I don't settle the account by end of the month, they're going to send it to collections and it'll ruin my credit. I need $4,800. I know it's a lot. I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice. I can give you the billing account number to send it directly. Please don't call. My phone situation is complicated right now. I read it aloud to Marcus. He made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. Medical debt. Classic. Sympathetic. Hard to verify quickly, emotionally loaded. It could be real, I said, even though something in my stomach had already decided it wasn't. Dad had his annual physical in March, Marcus said. I took him. He's fine, Lily. His blood pressure is a little high. That's it. He paid his copay with his debit card and we went to lunch after. The cold that moved through me then wasn't grief. It was something cleaner and harder. Anger. Someone had done their homework. They knew about the estrangement. They knew I hadn't spoken to my father in 2 years. They knew the medical debt would feel plausible, that the detail about not calling would keep me from verifying anything directly. They had built this carefully. They had studied our silence and decided to use it as a door. Who knows about us? I asked Marcus. Who knows enough about our family to do this? He didn't answer right away. We were both thinking the same name. I just wasn't ready to say it yet. My father had dated someone for about 18 months before Marcus and I moved out. Her name was Diane. She had come into his life about 8 months after my mother passed, which was too soon for both of us. But we were adults and we tried to be respectful about it. Tried being the operative word. Diane was warm in the way that people are warm when they want something. The kind of warmth that turns off like a light switch the moment it stops being useful. She had never liked me. She had never bothered to hide it particularly well. When I left for Columbus, when I stopped coming home for holidays, she had been the one who benefited most from my absence. She had moved into the house by last Christmas. Marcus had told me that much. I hadn't wanted to think about what that meant for my father. It was easier not to. Diane, I said finally. Marcus exhaled. She called me last month. Said Dad was having a hard time. Asked if I talked to you recently. What did you tell her? That we talked all the time, Marcus. I didn't want to give her information, Lily. I don't trust her. I stood up and started pacing my apartment the way I always do when my thoughts get too big to hold still for. My kitchen is 12 steps from end to end. I counted them without meaning to. She knows enough, I said. She's lived in that house. She knows his handwriting. She knows his history. She knows about the fight. She knows I haven't called in 2 years. She's also, Marcus said carefully, been spending money. Neither she nor Dad seems to actually have. He mentioned it once. Offhand. Like he didn't want me to make a thing of it. I stopped pacing. How much money? I asked. He didn't say. But he looked tired, Lily. He's looked tired for a while. The picture was assembling itself in a way I did not want to look at directly. My father. Stubborn. Proud. The kind of man who would drive on a flat tire for 2 miles rather than ask someone to stop and help. Had let a woman into his life and into his home, and now she was draining him quietly, and when that stopped being enough she had turned to me, because she knew I loved him, even after 2 years, even through all the silence. She had counted on that. We have to be smart about this, I said. Agreed. And we have to find out how bad it actually is. Not just for us. For him. Also agreed. Marcus paused. What are you thinking? What I was thinking was that I wanted to get in my car and drive to Harrisburg and knock on my own father's door and tell him what was happening. But I knew that wasn't the right move yet. Diane would close ranks. My father might not believe me, not because he was stupid, but because it is extraordinarily difficult to hear that the person you've let into your life is the person who's been stealing from it. I'm going to play along, I said. Just a little. Just enough to get her into the open. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Okay, tell me the plan. I texted the unknown number back that evening. I kept my tone uncertain, a little emotional, not hard to fake because a part of me genuinely was. I told them I wanted to help, but that $4,800 was more than I could put together quickly. I said I could do $500 as a first payment, cash, but that I needed to see my father first. I said I couldn't just wire money without knowing he was okay. That I needed to see his face. It took 40 minutes to get a response, longer than before. The hesitation was interesting. Dad understands. He's embarrassed about all this, but he wants to see you too. There's a coffee shop in Lancaster he used to take you to when you were little, the one on King Street. He says you'd know it. I did know it. The mention of it made something twist in my chest. It was called Passenger Coffee. My dad used to take me there on Saturday mornings when I was in middle school. He'd get a black coffee and I'd get a hot chocolate, and we'd sit in the window and he'd let me talk about whatever I wanted, and he actually listened. It was one of the best things about him. He was a genuinely good listener when he wasn't also being immovable. Whoever wrote that message had done their research, or they'd heard him talk about it. Either way, it made me feel sick. I texted Marcus. They named Passenger Coffee King Street. His response came fast. She's been there with him. I've seen photos on his Facebook. That was enough. I called Marcus and we made a plan. He would drive up from Pittsburgh and meet me in Lancaster the day of. He'd sit in a different part of the coffee shop, close enough to watch, far enough to go unnoticed. I would wear something nondescript. I would bring nothing except my phone with the recording app running. We also agreed that if Diane showed up alone, if there was no sign of our father, then we would go directly from that coffee shop to his house. Whatever was waiting for us there, we would face it together. The morning of the meeting was a Friday. I drove 2.5 hours to Lancaster with a podcast playing that I couldn't tell you a single thing about. My mind was somewhere else the whole time, cycling through versions of how this might go, what I might say, what she might do. I had rehearsed enough that I felt numb about it. That was probably better. Marcus was already there when I arrived. He was sitting at a small table near the back with a laptop open, looking for all the world like someone working remotely on a Friday morning. He gave me a small nod when I walked in. I didn't acknowledge him. I got a coffee I didn't drink and sat in the window. Diane walked in 12 minutes later. She was dressed nicely. A camel-colored coat, good boots, hair done. She looked like she was going to a brunch, not to impersonate my father in a fraud scheme. She scanned the room, found me, and her face arranged itself into something that was probably meant to look like relief. "Lily," she said, sitting down across from me. "I'm so glad you came." "Where's my dad?" I said. Her expression flickered, just slightly. He wasn't feeling well this morning. I told him I'd handle this. He asked me to come on his behalf. "He asked you," I said, "to come pick up cash from his estranged daughter, on his behalf." "He's embarrassed, Lily. You know how proud he is." "I do know that," I said. "I also know his handwriting slants to the left because he's left-handed. Every note he ever wrote me slanted to the left. The texts from that number were typed, but the way that message was written, the phrasing, the sentence structure, it didn't sound like him. My dad doesn't say things like my phone situation is complicated right now. He would say my phone is being weird, or he'd just call me from a neighbor's landline." Diane said nothing. "He doesn't know you're here," I said. "Does he?" It wasn't a question. She leaned back in her chair and the warmth left her face as completely as if someone had turned a dial. What was underneath it? Was something I recognized. The look of someone recalibrating quickly, deciding how to play the next 30 seconds. "I was trying to help him," she said. "He needs money. He won't ask for it himself. By pretending to be him. By reaching out to you in a way that he wouldn't. He misses you, Lily. He talks about you all the time." I used that. "You used his grief about me," I said, "to run a scam." "It's not a scam. He actually needs—" "My brother took him to his physical in March," I said. "He's fine. I want to know where the money is actually going." Diane stood up. The chair scraped back loud enough that a few people looked over. "I think I should leave," she said. "I think you should sit back down," said Marcus. He had moved from his table and was now standing just behind her. Diane turned around. If she was surprised, she didn't show it. But she sat. Marcus placed his phone on the table between us. On the screen was a screenshot, a bank transfer notification for a wire from my father's joint savings account. $4,000. To a name I didn't recognize. Dated 3 weeks ago. That's the third one in 4 months. Marcus said quietly. I found them last week when Dad asked me to help him check his account because he couldn't remember his online password. He didn't know about most of these transfers. They were made from Diane's phone using the banking app she helped him set up last spring. Diane's jaw tightened. He trusted you, I said. The words came out quiet. That surprised me. I had expected anger and I felt it, somewhere underneath, but what reached the surface first was something sadder. He was lonely. He was still grieving Mom. He let you in because he needed someone. And I was there, Diane said, and her voice had gone sharp and defensive. I was there every day. That counts for something. It does, I said. And you spent it? Marcus had already been in contact with the detective from the Lancaster County DA's office, a friend from college who owed him a favor. 2 plainclothes officers were outside. This had been the plan, not to confront Diane and let her walk away, but to confront her here and let the evidence do what evidence does. She was arrested in the parking lot of Passenger Coffee on a Friday morning. I stood by my car and watched it happen. The camel coat, the good boots. It looked wrong and right at the same time. I sat in my car for a while afterward. Marcus knocked on the passenger window and I unlocked the door and he got in. We sat there not talking for a minute, which is a thing we've always been able to do. One of the better things about having a sibling. We need to go see him, I said. Yeah, Marcus said. We do. My father's house was 20 minutes across town. I had not been there in 2 years. The drive felt longer. The house looked the same. Green shutters, small front porch, the oak tree in the yard that had been there since before I was born. The garden along the front walk was a little overgrown. My father had always kept it neat, which told me something without me having to ask. I rang the doorbell. He opened the door in a flannel shirt and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the way he always wore them, like he kept forgetting they were there. He looked older than I remembered, not broken. My father was too stubborn to break easily, but worn down in the way that happens when you've been carrying something heavy for a long time and you've been too proud to set it down. Lily, he said. Just my name. The way he said it was enough. Hi, Dad. He looked past me to Marcus, and something moved across his face, relief, mostly, and underneath it, a flicker of dread that told me he already suspected something was wrong. We sat at the kitchen table, same table we'd eaten every dinner at growing up, and Marcus walked him through what had happened. Slowly, carefully, the texts, the transfers, the coffee shop. My father listened without interrupting, which was new. He had always been someone who interrupted when he disagreed, who couldn't let a thing sit without pushing back on it. The fact that he didn't say a word told me the truth had already been assembling itself in him for a while. He just hadn't been ready to look at it directly. When Marcus finished, my father took off his glasses and set them on the table and looked at his hands. I kept thinking something felt off, he said. I kept thinking I was imagining things. You weren't, Marcus said. I should have called you, he said, and I wasn't sure if he meant about Diane or about everything else, maybe both. I should have called you a long time ago. He looked at me when he said it. I looked back at him. I know why you left, he said. I knew even then. I just didn't know how to say I understood without feeling like I was giving something up. That was pride. That was stupid. It was both of those things, I said, and he almost smiled. We stayed for the rest of the afternoon. My father made coffee the way he always makes it, too strong in the old percolator he refuses to replace. We sat at the table and talked. Not about Diane, not about the legal process that Marcus had already set in motion, but about other things. My job. His garden. The oak tree out front that had lost a big branch in last month's storm. Small things. The kind of small things that make up a life when you actually let yourself share it with someone. At one point, he got up and went to the small desk in the corner of the living room, the same desk he'd always used for bills and paperwork, and came back with an envelope. I've been writing you a letter for 6 months, he said, setting it on the table in front of me. I kept starting over. I don't know if it's any good. The envelope had my name on the front in his handwriting, left-handed, slanting toward the left, unmistakably his. I didn't open it at the table. I waited until I was sitting in my car in the driveway. Marcus already headed back to Pittsburgh, the porch light on and the house going quiet behind me. The letter was 4 pages. His handwriting was cramped and imperfect, and totally him, full of cross-outs and little margin notes where he'd thought of something to add. He wrote about my mother. He wrote about the day I was born, a detail he'd never told me before. That he'd cried in the parking lot of the hospital before coming inside because he was terrified and didn't want me to see him scared. He wrote about watching me grow into someone he hadn't expected and not knowing how to say he was proud of it because it looked so different from anything he'd imagined for me. He wrote that the last 2 years had taught him that his idea of what a family should look like had cost him the actual family he had. "You are the best thing I ever did," he wrote near the end. "Not the business, not the house, you and Marcus. I lost sight of that. I don't want to lose sight of it again." I sat in that driveway for a long time. The street was quiet. A neighbor walked a dog. A light went on in an upstairs window across the street. Eventually, I started the car. I had a 2.5-hour drive back to Columbus. I thought about calling Marcus, but I didn't. I thought about a lot of things. What I kept coming back to was the Tuesday morning in October when an unknown number buzzed on my kitchen counter, and I almost didn't open it. The cold coffee. The gray sky. The way something in my chest had made me stop. Diane had meant to use our silence against us. She had studied it, measured it, decided it was wide enough to walk through and take what she wanted. She wasn't wrong that the wound was real. She just miscalculated what it had made us. It hadn't made us easy to separate. It had made us people who knew what we'd lost, which meant we knew exactly what was worth fighting to get back. 2 weeks later, my father drove to Columbus for the first time. He'd never been. We went to a diner near my apartment on a Sunday morning, and he ordered black coffee, and I ordered hot chocolate. A callback I didn't plan, just reached for. And we sat in a window booth, and I let him talk, and he actually listened when I did. And it was not the same as it had been before. It was better, built on something that had been tested and held. He still writes letters. That's a thing I know about him now, something I didn't know before all of this. He prefers it to texting, which makes sense for a man who grew up in a house without a computer. They come in his cramped left-handed script, slanting toward the corner of the page, cross-outs and margin notes and all. I write back. The silence is over. We chose to end it ourselves, in our own time, on our own terms. Nobody gets to use that against us anymore. I've thought a lot about what Diane actually miscalculated. It wasn't the amount of money, it wasn't the timing, it was us, me and Marcus. And the specific way that 2 years of distance had changed us without her being able to see it. She looked at our silence and saw weakness. She saw a daughter who missed her father badly enough to stop asking questions. She wasn't entirely wrong about the missing part. But silence isn't just absence. Sometimes it's the thing that happens when you're learning to be honest with yourself about what you actually want, what you're actually willing to accept, what matters enough to fight for when it finally comes down to it. 2 years of not calling my father had also been 2 years of understanding exactly why I needed him to be different, and exactly what I would do the moment someone threatened what was left between us. Diane did the math wrong because she only counted what she could see. What I keep thinking about, though, is my father, not Diane. He made choices that opened the door to all of this. He let pride sit in the driver's seat for 2 years while I waited on the other side of a silence neither of us knew how to break. He let someone into his life who told him what he wanted to hear, and he chose that comfort over the harder work of rebuilding something real. Those choices had consequences, not as punishment, but as simple cause and effect. Actions accumulate. The things we avoid don't disappear, they wait. But here's the thing about my father that I've come to understand. He's not a bad man who made bad choices. He's a proud man who made frightened ones. There's a difference. Pride is usually fear with better posture. He was afraid of being wrong, afraid that admitting he'd pushed me away meant admitting he'd failed at something he cared about more than almost anything, being a good dad. So he stayed quiet, and staying quiet let Diane in. And Diane did what people like Diane do when nobody's watching closely enough. The letter he handed me that evening, 4 pages, cramped left-handed script, cross-outs and all, was the bravest thing I'd seen him do in my entire adult life. Not because it fixed anything immediately, because it was honest. Because he wrote it knowing I might not respond, knowing I had every reason not to, and he did it anyway. That's what courage actually looks like when it's not dramatic. It looks like a man sitting at a desk in the corner of his living room, writing a letter to his daughter for 6 months, starting over every time the words don't come out right. I want to be the kind of person who recognizes that in people. Who looks past the failure to the effort underneath it. That's not something I was born knowing how to do. It's something this whole experience taught me, slowly, and not without a lot of sitting in parked cars feeling things I didn't have names for yet. What Diane took from my father can be partially recovered. Money is concrete. Accounts can be audited, charges can be filed, restitution can be ordered. What's harder to recover is time. But even those 2 years, turned out not to be entirely lost. They were the distance we needed to become people who could finally talk to each other honestly. I don't think I would have sat at that kitchen table the same way if I hadn't spent 2 years learning who I was without his approval. And I don't think he would have handed me that letter if he hadn't spent 2 years sitting with the weight of what he'd let go. None of that makes the silence worth it exactly, but it makes it mean something. And meaning something is usually enough to move forward with.